For close to a century, the officers of the United States Border Patrol have traversed the foothills and valleys of the Otay Mesa, located in California's San Diego County. But in addition to contending with an endless stream of individuals attempting to illegally enter the United States, these agents have sometimes encountered intruders of a far more inexplicable nature. The agent watched on through his imaging scope as the other 3 members of his team quickly made their way across the valley floor below. As they readied themselves to execute their hastily planned ambush, he continued to provide regular updates in relation to the progress of their quarry. Further along the trail, a group of people had illegally crossed the Mexican border and were steadily progressing deeper into US territory. The scope itself was ex-military and had previously been incorporated into a tank turret. Now, it was unceremoniously wedged into the rear of a pickup, gifted to the Border Patrol as it was no longer needed by the Army. Whilst lacking definition, it was still reliable enough to make out the thermal signature of anything larger than an average-sized dog, and its current readout suggested that the group under observation contained around 30 individuals. When the last of his fellow agents radioed up that they were in position, the trap was finally set. All that was left now was to wait for the perfect time to engage the approaching targets. Border Patrol agents were always outnumbered, so speed and surprise were vital. Only the handlers of these migrants were ever likely to offer resistance. Identifying and apprehending those individuals first was key to success. Several minutes passed before the men down in the valley requested an update. Peering through the scope, the agent replied that they must have been spotted, as the group had now come to a halt. His message was met with an indignant reply. There was no way that the ambush could have been detected. Something else must have caused them to stop. After a few more minutes, the team accepted that any initiative had now been lost and emerged from their hiding places. As they made their way down the White Cross Trail, they suddenly heard crying and wailing up ahead. Unholstering their sidearms, they broke into a run before fanning out to surround their detainees. What the border agents found waiting for them was unlike any group they had previously encountered. Not one of the 35 migrants offered any resistance or attempted to escape. They instead sank to their knees, bursting into tears or praying for mercy and forgiveness. Utterly bemused, their 3 captors lowered their weapons, trying to find out what had transpired. Talking to the few terrified illegals who could speak English, an account was obtained. The members of the group claimed that they had been silently making their way along the trail when they had been detained by a lone Border Patrol agent. This man had spoken to them slowly and deliberately, introducing himself by name and advising them to go no further. He had then vanished, right in front of their eyes. After the agents asked the identity of this individual, their initial confusion gave way to anger. It took several minutes of further interrogation to convince them that the migrants were not lying or deliberately goading them. As they escorted the prisoners to the processing center, each of the agents was consumed by their own thoughts and misgivings. The name that the Mexicans had provided for the man was indeed that of a local Border Patrol agent, only he had been killed 4 months previously. On the morning of the 27th of March 1995, Rocky Elmore had awoken in severe discomfort. When he had gone to bed the previous evening, he had already felt unwell, but now he was struggling to focus on anything and could barely think straight due to the pain in his head. Reluctantly accepting that he was not fit for duty, he picked up his phone and called the Brownfield Border Patrol station to call in sick. Rocky was particularly disappointed, as he had been scheduled to work with a new partner for his night shift that evening, agent trainee Luis Santiago. Originally from Puerto Rico, Santiago was easygoing and had a reputation as something of a joker. Elmore had been looking forward to getting to know the new starter a little better, but instead now resigned himself to resting up in order to recover. That evening, he was awoken from a fitful sleep by an unexpected noise coming from the corner of his bedroom. Wearily rising to his feet, he noted that the digital clock on his bedstand indicated that it was 2 minutes past midnight. As he slowly padded across the room to his closet, where his uniform and belt kit were stored, he was intrigued to discover that his radio was emitting a persistent beeping sound. Despite several efforts to stop the noise, Elmore was unsuccessful, eventually removing the battery. He'd not long drifted back to sleep when the phone rang. The voice on the other end of the line was panicked. There had been an incident at the Otay Lakes Dam when the team had tried to detain a group climbing the trail there. A lone agent had transmitted a brief radio message and set off in pursuit, only to later be found dead at the bottom of the cliffs, having sustained fatal head injuries. The deceased man was Luis Santiago. By the time of Santiago's memorial service the following Friday, Rocky had sufficiently recovered from his illness to attend. When he returned home, he went back to bed, but was again awoken by his radio beeping in the closet. As he wearily removed the battery for a second time, Elmore again glanced at his clock and was unnerved to discover that it was once more displaying the time of 2 minutes past midnight. On his return to duty, Elmore attempted to requisition a new radio, only for the request to be denied. He was told that there was nothing inside the device capable of making such a sound, and that he must have been imagining things. It was only later that day that Rocky discovered further details about the death of his fellow agent, and was unnerved to read that the time of Santiago's last radio transmission on the night he died had been 2 minutes past midnight. Several months later, on the evening of July the 6th, Rocky found himself working a desk shift at the Brownfield Processing Center. Much like his fellow agents, he enjoyed the occasional spell inside the detention block, as the high number of migrants who required booking in meant that the shifts always passed quickly. Sure enough, not long after he came on duty, a sizable group of detainees was escorted into the building. As he began to work through the prisoners, Elmore noticed that they appeared more subdued than normal. Often, illegal immigrants were quite chatty and friendly when they were detained, holding the American agents in higher regard than the criminals who had taken their money to escort them across the border. But these migrants eyed their captors with suspicion, with several refusing to make eye contact. With the party booked in, Rocky settled into a quick coffee break with the team who had captured them, and listened with interest to the circumstances behind the arrests. The men and women had told the agents that they had been stopped in their tracks by a mysterious Border Patrol officer who had ordered them to sit down and put their hands on their heads before vanishing in front of their eyes. The agents had stumbled across the group by chance and were bewildered to find them all silently seated in a circle on the ground, refusing to lower their hands, which were affixed firmly atop their heads. Eventually, they had managed to coax the migrants to follow them to the center, and now joked that it was unlikely they would ever experience such good fortune again. 10 nights later, 2 border agents were alerted to a loud disturbance not far from where they were patrolling. Hurrying down the trail, they found a group of 30 distressed migrants, desperately trying to hand themselves over to the 2 Americans. They told their captors that they had been detained by a dead agent. They dubbed this apparition El Fantasma. Such sightings continued over the next few months, with groups of migrants either surrendering to the agents or being located sitting patiently waiting to be detained. They all named the lone figure who had stopped them as Agent Santiago, with many describing him as being translucent and illuminated by a soft and unearthly glow. Two officers lying in wait for a group were amazed when a pair of migrants walked straight up to their hiding place and asked to be detained. As they headed back to the detention center, the prisoners explained that they had become separated from their group and that the ghostly agent had saved their lives. Luis Santiago had apparently directed the two Mexicans towards the hiding agents and had advised them that if they did not surrender, they would likely die of thirst. Along with the sightings, rumors began to circulate. Many of the migrants detained by the border force were released and later detained on further occasions when they again tried to enter the country. Some disclosed to Elmore and his fellow agents that Santiago had been deliberately lured to the edge of the dam by a handler, who had then persuaded his customers to push the agent over the edge. The incident seemed to have a marked effect on the criminal gangs who were operating in the area. Gradually, they began to avoid the White Cross Trail, instead favouring the more dangerous route via the Otay Lakes Dam. Reported encounters with the ghost of Agent Santiago seemed to be pushing the gangs closer and closer to the place of his demise, culminating in one final and tragic incident. In the early hours of the 21st of January 1996, a team of Border Patrol agents detected 15 illegal immigrants attempting to cross the dam. On being sighted, this group turned and ran, leading to a short pursuit on foot. During the course of the incident, 6 of the targets fell from the dam, with one sustaining fatal injuries. An investigation into this death was quickly initiated, with the surviving migrants questioned about what had occurred. The survivors all claimed that they had been detained by a lone border agent, who had drawn his weapon and opened fire. In the panic that followed, the group had been gripped by a herd mentality, running as one until the lead runner had fallen over the dam. As a result of their testimony, the first agent to arrive on the scene was interviewed on suspicion of misconduct. Agent Arlo maintained that the migrants had already been running before he took up the chase, and was adamant that he had not drawn his firearm. When forensic evidence confirmed his account, the migrants were then shown photographs of all the attending officers in a bid to identify the agent in question. They were unable to do so until one of the interviewers produced an old photo of Agent Santiago, who was subsequently picked out by all of the survivors. It soon became apparent that the person who had died was the handler of the group. Something had scared him sufficiently to take off, and his charges had immediately followed. In the confusion, he had blundered over the side of the dam, falling and sustaining injuries that were then made worse by the 5 migrants who had landed on top of him. In the aftermath of this incident, the sightings of the ghostly agent abruptly ceased. To the men and women who had served with Luis Santiago, it was clear what had taken place. Following his death, their colleague had made it his business to hunt down the criminal responsible for his murder. Finally, after 9 months, he had been successful, ending the life of his killer in the same manner he himself had died. Now, his soul at peace, Agent Santiago could at last draw a close to his final patrol. The tragic story of the Phantom Agent is by no means the only supernatural sighting reported by the agents who patrol the Otay Mesa. There have also been numerous sightings of a ghostly mother and daughter who were murdered there many years before. Officers working alone in the Copper Canyon area have often reported terrifying encounters with these two apparitions. One evening, Rocky Elmore had been deployed to the canyon to keep an eye on a party of trainees who were passing through the area on a night hike. It soon became clear that this group had become detached before an agent began screaming into his radio for help. Elmore immediately made his way down into the canyon to help search for the missing man. When the terrified trainee was located, he told his rescuers he had been walking alone when he had heard the sound of a woman crying. He had eventually located a lone figure, crouching down by a nearby bush, crying out that she had been separated from her daughter. When he had approached her, she had looked up, and the front of her head had been completely devoid of any facial features. Another agent lying in wait for a group of migrants had heard approaching footsteps, but when he emerged from his position, he saw a lone woman in a nightdress walking towards him. As she stepped forward into a patch of moonlight, he had suddenly realized that she had no face, just a black mass where it should have been. Just as prevalent are sightings of a young girl walking alone through the border region in a white nightgown. Sometimes she will appear unexpectedly in front of an agent to tell them she is lost, and then disappear. At other times, officers will attempt to apprehend her as they believe she has become separated from another group. She then abruptly vanishes as they approach. The most disturbing story involving the girl in white centers around an agent who had parked up at the gates that prevented public access into the Marin Valley. As he had been unlocking the gates, he had caught sight of something floating in the nearby creek. Abandoning his task, he had walked down to the water and shone his torch towards this object, suddenly realizing it was the body of a young girl floating face down. The agent had immediately turned and run back to the truck, where he had left his radio. Reaching inside and retrieving the device, he had turned to find the girl standing right next to him staring up. He was consumed by an overpowering sense of sadness before the child had disappeared, leaving him standing, alone and traumatized, next to his vehicle. One theory about these two apparitions centers on an abandoned ranch house, located at the most southern point of the Marin Valley. This ruined building has stood empty since the occupants were murdered by Native Americans during the 1800s, and it is rumored that the family who lived there had been killed and thrown down the property's stone well. Rocky Elmore was one of many agents to have encountered something unearthly at the site. Attending the location following a report of lights having been seen there one evening, he and his partner had been about to give up the search when they realized that something was illuminating the inside of the ranch house. The two agents had watched on in confusion as a floating light had suddenly emerged from inside, straight through a solid stone wall. It was then joined by a number of identical lights, all of which had no obvious source. These lights cast no shadow and had begun to move around at high speed, seeming to chase and collide with one another. When the pair had tried to get closer to investigate, they had immediately disappeared. There have been other reports of mysterious activity within the vicinity. Stories of a large invisible entity which moves around in the dead of night, disturbing the foliage and water it passes through, but never revealing itself to the naked eye. Some agents also claim to have caught sight of large cat-like creatures stalking groups of migrants in the distance, and there are many reports of Sasquatch being seen in the area. It seems that there is something inexplicable that dwells within the mesa. Commentators have long drawn parallels between poltergeist activity and high concentrations of limestone and granite. The Otay Mesa has an abundance of both materials and is often shrouded in mist and fog as a result of the moisture which is trapped and stored within them. Whilst it is easy for those who have not served in the Border Patrol to dismiss such testimony as paranoia or fatigue, it is notable that many of the stories coming from within their ranks are not widely circulated. The agents who come forward have not done so for notoriety or fame, but often in order to reassure colleagues who have experienced similar matters. There is clearly something within this region of the US border that has a deep and profound effect on those enlisted to police it. Something that captures the spirits of those who have died within the locality, giving them the opportunity to remain at the scene of their passing and correct whatever wrongs may have led to their demise. Our hearts go out to the family of Luis Santiago, along with all those who have lost their lives in this region. May their souls rest in eternal peace.